Okay, cool. I was going to let everyone know we're planning to record. So if you don't want to be on the recording, please turn your camera off. And it'd be great if everyone can stay muted as well. Um, we will have time at the end for questions. So if you do have questions you want to ask, please pop them in the chat and we'll come to them towards the end of this discussion. So to kick us off, my name is Marianne Brierley. I'm a service design principal at DXW. I've worked in the public sector for the last 7 years, and I've spent most of the last year of that working inside NHS England to support the digital transformation of screening services. And I'm now focused specifically on breast screening. And this is really where that well-known phrase from Lou Down about service design being 10% design and 90% creating the conditions for service design to happen has been so central to everything that I've been doing for the last year. And that experience really prompted my colleague Jane Maber and myself to start a blog series recently describing the space around the thing, which is the sort of theme of today, to highlight all the work that goes into delivering new products and services in the public sector and the importance of designing for the environment that they're going to be used in. So today I'm here to host my colleagues in DXW, but also in NHS England to share our experiences of the space around products and services. So like I said, there'll be time for questions at the end. Please do put them in the chat or raise your hand towards the end. So over to some intros. I've got with us here today Liz Lutgendorf. Liz is the breast screening pathway lead in NHS England. She's working with a team of digital professionals to tackle all the complex problems surrounding the delivery of a new breast screening service. And Liz has spent over a decade working on digital transformation issues from local, national, and international perspectives. Joining Liz is also Sarah Fisher. Sarah is a Deputy Director for Hospital-Based Services and Digital Screening. She's leading teams to deliver new end-to-end services that support screening programmes across England. And prior to that, Sarah worked in central government delivering digital services and education and childcare. And joining us, ladies, is Alex Yedigaroff. Alex is the Director of Data and Product at DXW, where he leads our mission to do quality work with meaningful and lasting impact. His background is across delivery, product, and digital strategy roles in the public sector, including central government, local government, and parliament. So we've got a great selection here today. So we really want to shine a light on some of the less visible, often less glamorous work that goes into delivering digital services in healthcare. If you work in digital yourself, you're likely very familiar with product development phases and the roles of multidisciplinary teams. But in this panel discussion, we're going to focus on the importance of creating the right space around the thing. So all that invisible work that goes into delivering digital public services. So I'm going to come over to you first, Liz, with our first question to kick us off. What would you say is the least visible yet super critical work required to deliver new products and services in healthcare?
Thanks. So I'm going to use the favorite word of everyone, which is governance. So it was really interesting when I joined. I joined back in May with the team, and I talked to lots of people within breast screening, but again, wider kind of vaccination colleagues as well. And it's the thing that they said was all the hardest thing to do, because you're kind of in a central area, but you're working with so many other partners across trusts and hospitals and those kind of areas, which do not have the same technology, do not have the same approaches. But in order for you to be successful, you have to kind of meet them where they are. I heard a phrase over and over again, which is kind of like the thing that like I echo in my head all the time, which is pilots are where things go to die in the NHS. And so I don't want to call anything a pilot because of the connotation of that, but it's the thing. It's like it's easy to do it once with a very willing, enthusiastic partner. But with something like screening and doing it nationally, you have to do it, in our case, 77 times at the very least. We think it might be a bit more because some of our breast screening offices are split across multiple trusts. But we have there's not everyone's going to be enthusiastic or have the time or the capacity. You know, we're going to have to do kind of negotiation and meet them halfway and various other things in order to get this thing over the line. And the other kind of tension we have is with product teams, because obviously you want to work in a really agile way. You want to kind of deliver incrementally. But we, in order to like not just build a thing and sit on it for a year, we'll have to do all the governance concurrently. So we need to know just enough to be able to start doing all this governance, because it's going to take a couple years just on that to get done. So I think it's kind of invisible, because if it goes well, you don't see it happening and you think it's fine. But if you don't do it, then you are one of those pilots that have died and never progressed beyond your kind of initial potential. So I think that's a huge one for me. And kind of treating all of these other kind of groups in trusts, CIOs and ICBs and everyone has their own kind of individual user kind of group with their own needs, their own constraints, so that we can make it as least painful as possible and kind of build a positive relationship from the start, saying that like, we're going to take your needs into consideration. We're not just going to expect the world from you at the point where we need it, where it might be completely inconvenient for you.
Yeah, and we've been putting quite a lot of work into that and understanding what they need and how we can address some of that. I suppose, Sarah, do you have any thoughts around governance? Because being sort of director level, you might have different sort of governance that you have to deal with.
Well, I get that we've started with a like everyone's like, yes, the governance, the governance session. I guess I totally agree with Liz. It's incredibly important. I think it's also sort of inextricable from the concept of trust and confidence, because often when what the kind of governance processes are seeking to assure is like we have faith that you're doing things in the right way. We have confidence. You've proven to us that you're going to deliver for our trust in a way that that safeguards our people and our patients. And so I think there's something about, as digital teams, how we approach those processes that can feel quite burdensome in the spirit of like using them to build mutual trust. I think that's what Liz and her team are doing a great job of. And I think that's part of the like hidden work, is building trust with trusts, that like we have the knowledge and ability to deliver in a way that meets their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the trust is a really big thing, and it's where I think sometimes products and services can fall flat because you can design the best thing, but if no one trusts it's going to do its own job, the job that you need it to do, where's it going to go? I don't suppose, Alex, you have any thoughts around that side of things from your experience?
Yeah, definitely. The trust thing is so important. Trust is really easy to lose and then incredibly hard or impossible to build back up if you have lost it. And I think there is something about how digital approaches and kind of product mindset butts up against the like hard realities of things needing to be right, particularly in an environment like the NHS. So uh, we can lose trust by doing something that isn't enough, or that doesn't actually meet the needs of the organization or the end user. Like an MVP might not be enough, might actually not be a helpful thing to release into a live environment. There's often like a feature bar that needs to be reached, which might be parity or almost parity or beyond parity of the thing that's already there. Otherwise, we're introducing additional complexity, additional complication into people's lives, and they're not going to want to use the thing, or they're going to lose faith that this is actually here to solve their problems. It's not always realistic to dual run two services or two products or two digital products within a wider service. So we risk adding that extra complexity, and that's where I think in this healthcare environment, or in generally in complicated environments, I reflect on this because it's potentially kind of masochistic to be a product person in the public sector, because we don't have that luxury that a commercial environment might have, where they can choose their users, they can put something out there, see if it works. If it doesn't, do something else, and what they're burning through a different kind of capital than what you're potentially burning through in these environments. So yeah, that's where it is so important. Through governance is about making good decisions, right? And through forming trust through those allegiances, through those boards, proving the value of what we're doing, but making sure that yeah, we are bringing people along in that journey is absolutely critical, because if you've lost them, it can really damage a whole program.
I think that's a really good point, and I think the point about MVPs is really interesting, and I think totally I think it's really hard for product teams to work out how to like test and learn and start small in this environment. And I don't know, I haven't like landed upon the answer yet. I think it's like a constant negotiation. But certainly I've seen like we've lost trust in some cases with our users where we've launched something that was an MVP that didn't feel like it hit the mark. And then because of the way government operates, the team gets moved away or that they stop being invested in. And then the users are kind of stuck with this like version of a service that they feel is quite ropey. And I don't know what the right answer to that is, but it feels like in healthcare in particular, there's a real challenge around creating the conditions where product teams can test and learn.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I really want to dig into there. So we'll go with the MVP bit of this first. So with teams moving on, because this is a real concern that we have heard from people in breast screening, because they've had some experience of that in the past where, you're delivered this basic line and then nothing gets developed beyond that. How can we make sure that teams are protected to continuously develop these products and iterate with feedback?
That's a good question. I think there's sometimes in the public sector, there is sometimes like a slightly, teams don't always appreciate the magnitude of what it means to start a digital transformation program. And we as people who do understand it need to keep with seniors making the case of like, this isn't a one-off investment. This isn't like a, we'll build a digital thing and then we'll all, for a couple of years, and then all the people will leave and it will just carry on running like perfectly. And that's just not how software works. And equally on the kind of, for our policy owners, doing a digital transformation doesn't mean that a digital team comes along and just digitizes your current process. It means that like they will ask difficult conversations. You might have to change how you think about something. And I think there's not always in the public sector a good understanding of what that means. And I think we need to keep making the case to seniors of, if you want to do that, it's going to be challenging and it's going to be hard and it's going to cost money over a sustained period of time. It's not a like one and done thing.
Yeah, perhaps that's like the space after the thing. I think people have been quite rightly burnt by IT projects in the past that deliver something probably, often not often not what was expected or wanted, and then the project finishes, the people go away, and it's the like embedding the digital service within the service. There's a whole kind of range of capabilities there that work together in order to ultimately deliver a single outcome. And that has to be done through proving it and not, in programs and projects. Like what is going to happen afterwards? What is the enduring, lasting capability that can be continually improved and worked on with the people that need it? Yeah.
I think the other thing is kind of building those relationships across program, policy, clinical, all of these things, because, being in the world now and going to some of the conferences and all this other thing, there are so many ambitions for screening, especially in breast screening, that we can't necessarily build into the first version because we just need to build the first version. But that kind of alliance going forward can like craft really powerful messages about, what if we do risk stratification? What's the role of AI? All of these sort of things that mean that if everyone's aligned on them, it'll be much easier to convince them than if you have to first convince everyone in your unit of the value. If you all are aligned on that value, then it'll be quite a lot easier to convince others of it, because you can say it's good from clinical, from commercial, from whatever different angle you poke it.
And this is another one of those quite invisible bits of it, is the different mindsets. I've seen some comments in the chat around like what's an MVP, etc. And I think there's such a variety of different points of view about even what that is. So I think someone mentioned earlier about language that we can't use, connotations of language. And I find that again and again also makes it harder to deliver things, because it's just so hard to get on the same page sometimes about what it is we're trying to build and why.
And I think there is language that we could sort of co-create with users, because there's language to describe things that you do in, randomized control trial or whatever else that exists in the healthcare sector that probably resonates better with users. But I think sometimes as digital teams, and we'll probably come on to this, we we use jargon and we use phrases that perhaps we don't mean to gatekeep, but we kind of do, and we come into an environment which has an agreed set of language, which has quite a like codified set of language, and we use our own. We use phrases like MVP, and we use phrases. Jim in the chat is talking about discovery, which is probably a whole other kettle of fish, but we use phrases like alpha and private beta, and they don't have like an agreed meaning out there in the healthcare sector, and we need to be much more deliberate about how we describe things so that people have a real sense of what they're getting from the first phase and the next phase, etc.
Yeah. And that really nicely links me back to the next point I really wanted to pick up on, because a few of you mentioned talking about building trust. And so my question to all of you is, whose responsibility is that to build trust? Is that on the multidisciplinary product teams? Is that on the deputy directors? Like, who does that sit with?
I think it's everyone in their different ways, because, you know, you could have 3/4 of the team being really good, or like the whole program team, and it just takes kind of like one person to torpedo that and like raise questions of delivery or confidence or whatever. And so having that kind of alignment on what you want to do and all that sort of stuff to kind of reiterate what you're delivering, how you're going to deliver it, is really important, I think, to give that confidence. Like, again, within screening and breast screening particularly, the kind of replacement of the current service, which has done a miraculous job for almost 30 years of keeping this program going, it has been promised to be replaced several times, and it hasn't emerged, as Jim pointed out, discoveries and things like that. So there's a huge amount of enthusiasm, but a huge amount of skepticism. And so we have to be constantly doing that drumbeat of like, this is still happening. We are still delivering. It's still going to meet your needs. Whether it's the product team doing some sort of work to move the product onward, either there's user research or moving into one of the kind of phases of delivery, and also us talking to all the trusts and everyone has a part to play. And I think it only kind of takes one thing to go wrong, which would just take so much effort to rebuild that trust again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Liz. I think it is everyone's responsibility, but there are some distinct layers, and I think being intentional about where that responsibility or that duty to build and prove trust is probably to be quite explicit about it and to talk about it is a good thing. That's everything from building like trust within the team, to the different layers of governance and organizations, you know, within this environment, dealing with multiple organizations, you know, trust with trusts. But I think being intentional and explicit about building trust being a duty, and understanding the techniques via which to do that, which is often centered on actually proving that you are going to do the thing that you say you're going to do and then doing it.
Yeah.
I think there's that, and I think there's also like something that I think a lot of our users in the public sector would, or something that I think would resonate with them quite a lot, which I think is partly what Jim's getting to, is that when you have a digital team come in, you often feel like you see a lot of different faces. Like, you just get to know someone and then they're gone. And that's very different to people who work in BSOs, some of whom have worked there for like 20 years. And I'm not saying that people who work on the program, like if you sign up, you're here for 20 years or you're not in at all. But I think there's like, how do we, and I think it goes to the point in the chat about sharing knowledge and working in the open, such that when a BSO is speaking to someone, they feel like even if it's a new person, that person has heard and absorbed and can reflect back to them the things that they've been saying to the team over the last 5 years. Because otherwise, that's where we get frustration. It's like, it's a new person and they're telling me it's all a blank sheet of paper, and they don't seem to have listened to anything that I've said to anyone else in the team previously. And that is a bit more work for us internally, because if you're going to speak to a BSO, you do need to know who else has spoken to them recently, like what have they said to them, what are the answers to these questions that they might ask me that are outside my immediate product team but that are very important to them. I think we need to make sure that we are armed with those kind of things when we're speaking to our users, because every time we aren't, we degrade trust.
Yeah, that institutional knowledge, institutional history, how to not just be repeating the same questions or processes that people have felt in the past is absolutely crucial. Yeah.
And remarkably, quite a lot of work considering this. To anyone who's not working in screening, there's quite a few different multidisciplinary teams working on different areas of the service. And so there's a lot going on all the time. It can be very hard to keep on top of who's doing what with who and what have they learned and who are they going to visit. Liz, did you want to come in? I saw you went off mute.
I was, and then I completely forgot what I was going to say.
Oh,
So
sorry.
move on.
Okay, I'll move us on to. Oh, go on, Alex.
I was just going to jump in. Yeah, again, just on the theme of trust, I think there is some power in sharing the. I was going to say vulnerabilities, but maybe like sharing the trade-offs. Everything that we do has a trade-off. We prioritize one thing over another, continually, and sharing those trade-offs or being clear about the rationale behind a prioritization call, or why doing one thing will mean not doing another thing or not doing another thing till later. Again, a sense of shared ownership around those decisions, again, leads back into the governance. In I can think of like various different kind of big government programs. So that's been a really successful kind of shared risk, shared trade-offs. Has been so helpful in building an alliance around the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to move us on to our next starting point. I'm going to start with you this time, Sarah. More about risks. So, if we don't understand the space around the thing that we're building, what impact is that going to have on outcomes?
So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking a lot about the extent to which we understand the wider incentives that operate in the system in which we're working, and how our new thing might disrupt those in a way that makes it either harder or easier to achieve our outcomes. So a good example, I think, would be the work that's happening in the teams at the moment to move to the NHS app or SMS messages for digital invites for breast screening, where you could sort of say, okay, we're building this thing nationally, and we're going to pay nationally for the cost of any letters that we have to send. But we also need to think about, at the moment, that's the breast screening officers pay it directly. So they have a, like, what incentive are we creating there in terms of what is the behavior that we want to drive on the part of the breast screening officers? What's the behavior we want to drive on the part of the participant? And how is our new service either enabling or blocking that? And I think there's something, I think it's almost an expansion of how we think about something like user research, where we're thinking about how we are like intentionally driving behaviors in one direction or another, and keeping an eye on the impact of our outcomes and how we're doing that. I think for me, that's the thing that where I've seen digital teams like struggle or fail, it's because they might have built an amazing service, and so far as it's really like usable and users love it, but it is not achieving an outcome because it's producing an incentive in a direction that wasn't intended. A good example, I think, from Department for Education was a team that was building a way of parents reporting behavior of teachers, and they built the service and it made it really easy for parents to do that, and they saw a really massive spike in parents doing that, and then the impact on teachers and on the teaching profession was like hadn't really been thought through at the beginning of the program, and was really significant and was unmanageable, and ultimately they had to build more friction into the service so that there were more points of saying, are you really sure you want to report this teacher to the Teaching Regulation Agency? And I think there's quite a few examples like that where we don't think about like the wider incentives we might be driving when we're building a new digital service.
Yeah, it can be so easy to get like stuck into the detail when you're building things as well and forget where that sits in that bigger system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I think sometimes the opposite can also be true, where we build too much friction into a system, or we assume the people that are going to be using this product or interfacing with this service, we're assuming straightforward, narrow paths, and we know we exist in a world full of edge cases, and that if we're not understanding actually the wider environment around why this thing exists or other services that it interacts with, or actually what the path is that somebody is taking. Like this is just a little piece of their day, a little piece of their job, a little piece of what they're doing. That I have seen lots of times of actually quite simple constraints being applied in a digital product that make the thing fall over for that person. They can't use it. And, here groweth shadow IT or shadow systems because people can't use the thing. It works for these straightforward cases, doesn't work for these others. I think this is relevant to the MVP conversation as well. And so they're reliant on whatever it is, spreadsheets, pen, paper, other tools, existing tools, and the thing never lands because we have actually intentionally constrained something without understanding what that constraint means.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I've been with teams before who've kind of judged themselves as having failed because their users are still using spreadsheets. I think, and I don't know what the right answer there is, but it feels like it's really hard to shift people off some of those, those people might have been using a certain spreadsheet that they designed in a certain way that they love for the last decade. It's really hard to get someone to shift to using our new service. And I wonder if we need to, I think it's like expanding the concept of success to encompass if we're achieving our outcome and if that person is able to deliver the job that they need to do we mind if they're still doing part of it on a spreadsheet? I don't know.
The other thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is within the program, there's like a very different approach to risk. In that, like, risk in clinical senses is that someone will not receive screening and could have, we could miss an invasive cancer being detected as part of the screening program. And over time, all of this risk has led to like right results process, standard operating procedures, different tiny changes to the program to account for like the kind of operational practice, but also obviously the kind of interplay with the digital system. And I'm scared of how much evidence it'll take to overcome like attitudes to perceived risk because like if the system is better, we can have fewer of these kind of right results processes, or we can simplify the standard operating procedure. But that's kind of like a comfort blanket because all of those were very hard won things based on something going wrong. But if you're kind of starting new, like the whole process is going to be different in terms of how you interact with the system. The kind of modern digital system versus the current one means that you can build in a lot of these safeguards that you couldn't before because if you don't know, there are actually 77 instances of this service. It's not one central service. So, and my worry about it is like we're too risk averse because like it has been a kind of series of like getting things incrementally wrong at different times and not kind of stepping back and being like, okay, well, what is the main risk here? Like, what risks are we actually trying to like get rid of? And we have lots of discussions about number of clicks because like screening is very, very high throughput. It's very different than kind of like normal clinical practice. And if you look at the whole system, yes, it might take 2 clicks more here, but actually that saves like hours of work over here. Like, what is the greater risk, the 2 seconds here or the hours here? And I think we haven't necessarily grappled with the whole picture and how much risk is where and what parts we can reduce by doing better. And I think it's really hard because like you're literally talking about people's potential health outcomes, which is very, very different than like previous work on gov.uk. It's like someone might not be able to find information easy, but it's not literally like you might not get diagnosed with cancer, which is very different and very hard to argue against.
And I guess that also like there's something there about like how you were kind of zooming out, because product teams might be just focused on like how long does it take that person to do that particular task without thinking about like, and how is the wider system operating with it, like with our new service. And I think there's something as leaders about how we incentivize and make space for that like zooming out.
Yeah, and like remembering the value, or one of the big values of digital is that we can measure and observe what happens. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Liz. We're never going to be able to squeeze all the risk out of the system, but we will be able to identify what is happening and where a service is failing better and be able to react to that quicker. And we might be able to move that slider from like, is it better that there's more clicks over here and less time over there? And by observing what is happening. And the job is not to introduce new or greater risks, but if we can put in place some kind of foundational structure that's able to measure outcomes and measure what's happening in the service, then we can use that data to continually improve what's happening.
Yeah. I think we've also kind of skirted around through the talk of like unintended consequences of the things we're doing and the sort of constraints that we're working with. What impact does that have on the potential to actually transform things? So we talked about transformation of services, but I think a lot of the time we're kind of stuck in just fixing the as is so that that works a bit better. So what can we start doing to move beyond the as is?
It's really hard, isn't it? And it goes to Liz's point, because when you're replacing a legacy thing, it's quite tempting to try and do everything at once and go like, we're not just going to replace the legacy thing, we're going to like transform how all of this works. But ultimately, if you need to keep in mind your users' ability to like receive all of that change at once. And that is sometimes where I think we always have to strike a balance between sort of striking while the iron's hot and going, we've got an opportunity to change this thing, but also going, but it's already going to be quite disruptive for our users, and an early version of the service might look quite similar to what they're used to, but it creates a space for us to continue to experiment and change in a way that is more manageable for them. I think striking that balance is hard, but I think it's what we're going to transform the whole thing at the same time is probably not the right answer.
Yeah. I think for me, it's like looking at what's the highest value targets. Like what would significantly allow us to do things differently and better? And can we explore that in a reasonable enough time frame that would help us impact the shape of the product that we're building? Because there's so much scope for improvement that you're spoiled for choice. Like anything we do is probably going to improve things just from like just a data transformation perspective of being able to look at data more easily nationally, but also just building useful data for the teams within breast screening offices to improve their operations. But there are other things that we would build a product, and then if we wanted to change it in the future, would be like, why did we build it this way in the first place? So like finding those bits which are like, this is really hard and makes us develop in a very particular way or take a very particular direction. Is it still valid, given that the program hasn't really changed that much in 30 years? And so like finding those really high value targets that mean that in the future, there's just so much more potential again to iterate and improve and do things differently, that if we have that conversation now while we're in the midst of change internally within the program, much easier to do now when they're expecting it than in 5 years when we've just finished and they're like, what do you mean you want to change everything, right? Like what are those like core things that we would need to explore and change if we want to, or at least have that discussion?
Yeah, I think this is where also thinking about things from the sort of users or the clinical person's perspective is quite helpful as well. So we recently did a bit of an exercise using jobs to be done, which was very much focused on the job that people are hiring products and services to do for them. And what I love about that model is it respects the fact that everything's going to change over time. So the stuff we're talking about now, the solutions we come up with in the next couple of years, we might have to change our approach long term from that, but the job someone wants to complete is still going to be the same, just the options we have to complete it is different. And so I think that's a really nice way to get people aligned around what is it we're trying to deliver, and opens up the opportunities as well. So you're not jumping straight into solutions, you're thinking about what outcomes you're trying to bring to people. So I suppose that's one takeaway of like a technique we've used recently to get us thinking about that. I'm going to move us on to our sort of last question so that I make sure we have time for others to come in with questions, because I have seen there's quite a lot going on in the chat, which I apologize I've not looked into in any great detail, because I'm trying to keep up with you three. So I'm going to come to you this time, Alex. Based on everything we've talked about here, how can we start building this awareness or the skill sets we need into our practice?
Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, good question. I think I'm going to start by talking about DDAT. So we need to look beyond DDAT in how we build our digital teams and how we use those teams in order to build services. And we need to remember that like the digital service shouldn't end up being a separate thing to the actual service. And I think that DDAT as a capability framework, although it has been really useful as a response to the difficulties of building kind of digital capability in the public sector, I think we have reached the seams of its usefulness, and we're starting to see where it falls down. It's promoted what I would see as big teams, often two big teams, with people needing to stay within their lanes. It's overly prescriptive in that sense, and it has actually ignored some of the wider roles and expertise that you're going to need in that team in a day-to-day, week-to-week basis in order to kind of meet some of the challenges that we've already been talking about. I'm kind of drawn to thinking about multidisciplinary workings. I think multidisciplinary working is something that digital has borrowed from the clinical setting, but has actually ignored some of the wider business, organizational, in a health context, clinical expertise that you'd actually need in that room, in that team, in order to be able to kind of drive the right decisions, bring the right expertise into the room, be humble as digital people, that we are probably expert at the methods and not necessarily in the context. And it's not our job to shortcut 10, 20 years of professional expertise. Why isn't the team embracing that expertise and bringing it in? I've seen some really good examples of bringing kind of subject matter experts into teams. I think we need to increasingly be thinking more about how we get proper representation of end users or people close to end users into those teams. So clinical expertise, also procurement expertise, finance expertise, kind of organizational expertise, some representation of that into digital teams. So as we're creating these teams and building on these teams, it's then easier to do that thing that we touched on earlier of how this team kind of seamlessly after the project or after the thing has been built blends into the overarching delivery of the service, and hasn't been, as Sarah put it, I think kind of a team of new people who came in and sat over here, did a thing and then disappeared. It's how, the capabilities will come up and down. We might need less kind of build capability after a certain point, but how it's been built is a truly multidisciplinary thing from the outset.
Absolutely. And Sarah, I guess part of your role is identifying people to bring in to do stuff. So
yeah, I totally agree with what you just said there, Alex. I think like the DDAT framework is basically now just totally inadequate to the tasks in front of us. And I think we need to much more deliberately design what the team needs to look like in order to achieve the outcome in front of us. And that might be that might look like a totally different range of skills to the like traditional multidisciplinary team that we're used to in digital. And I think part of the reason why this work of like designing the space around the thing is quite hard to think about and articulate is because we don't have language for some of the roles that we need. And we experience it when we work with the policy team, because they're all just, in general anyway, in government, a lot of them are just called things like policy advisor or senior policy advisor. And I think thinking in a much more expansive way about how we name what some of that work is and what the skills are that we need would help us, both from a policy perspective and from a digital perspective, actually build a team that can achieve its outcomes, and not just some digital people who fit neatly into DDAT boxes and then some policy people who are just all called policy people. That like feels obviously wrong. And I think now is the time for us as digital professionals and as people who work in this space to think about what the roles are that we need in the future and how we name them properly.
Yeah,
I think within not the DDAT roles, but the other roles like commercial and legal and information governance, all of them as well, like they always just feel completely maxed out in terms of capacity. And in order to do our work effectively, we need to somehow extract like some support from them. And so there really needs to also be thinking in those wider roles. If you're thinking of if you're a department or an organization going through massive transformation, you want to free up some of those people, either by like hiring someone to take on their daily work temporarily or whatever, because you can tell like the people who want to help, they'll go above and beyond, but only for so much as their capacity lets them. And I think there are like really fascinating and really good people in all these roles who will think strategically and out of the box and like come up with solutions to problems that you didn't know were possible. But like they can only do that if they have the time as well. So it's not just the DDAT teams that need the capacity to build and change. It's like all of those people around them as well. Otherwise, again, it'll either slow you down, you'll get kind of substandard processes, or just like, stuff will just get stuck in different like committees and like, but you only need like the one person to be able to show you the route that you could take that you didn't even know existed. And I think without freeing up some of their time as well, we're going to be begging for this capability rather than having embedded within teams, or at least accessible in a very readily accessible way, not like fill out a form and we'll come back to you in 2 months with what we can do.
And I'm sorry, go on, Alex.
No, you go, Sarah.
I think that kind of goes back to the point we were talking about at the beginning about like the way in which organizations embark on like digital transformation programs. And sometimes our job as digital people might be to say to an organization, actually, don't do it. you don't have the capacity in your commercial team. You don't have the right people in the policy team. You will end up, you can't just transplant on a multidisciplinary DDAT team and go like, okay, off you go, achieve this outcome that we've announced in a white paper or whatever. And that government really often does that. And I think sometimes you almost want to like, well, this sounds very programmatic, but you almost want to like give the organization a way of thinking about, or a way of like scoring themselves in terms of like, are we ready to do this work? And if we're not, what are the skills that we need to cultivate in the professions that are actually going to make this transformation succeed or fail?
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I'm also struck by Liz's point about like the capacity of the people that are needed, and there is a danger that if that capacity isn't freed up or isn't available or isn't kind of in there, you see sometimes digital teams or digital functions, they end up duplicating those functions, and that might work for a really short period, but over time is going to create organizational othering. And again, we've seen that through the kind of history of digital government, where sometimes it has been necessary for digital to be a disruptive force, but actually it's often counterproductive to have what I would say can sometimes be a sense of arrogance. It's like, we're just going to do this over here because we're moving faster and we do things differently to you over here, and you haven't got the capacity to really help us. So you end up kind of to use the shadow analogy, creating kind of shadow functions where you need them and they're not available from the rest of the organization. So yeah, there is something on us to be making that case and that space for those other functions and expertise to be properly part of the build.
It's hard though, isn't it? Like, I don't know. I think something that I've reflected on over the years is like, it's almost uniquely emotionally draining doing that type of work, because you're constantly making the case to people who might, and it feels like you're kind of making the case for your own existence, which is quite a weird thing to have to do at work. Maybe that's taking off piece, but I do feel like it can be that feeling of always having to like argue for, always having to argue for your teams and your ways of working. I think it's like right to acknowledge that is draining and difficult.
Yeah, there's a note in the chat about needing grit. Yeah, perhaps it's just the reality at this stage. Yeah, I think you're right, Sarah.
It can also feel like you're not actually delivering anything because like you're spending so much time getting some minor thing unblocked, which in 2 months will be important, but is not important now. And then that team just gets to sail on, and you're just like, well, I had several very important meetings that got things unblocked. And like I had like prepared many PowerPoints and stuff to prove this point. And it gets like, yeah, you can reuse your PowerPoints, you can like rehearse, but it is just like the never ending treadmill of convincing people that this is better, that we can deliver it, that it's going to be, meet your needs, it's going to address this problem that you've now raised, all these sort of things. It is an absolute grind. But also like when it works, like the next day you're just like, it's the best euphoric feeling. It's just like, yes, we did this thing and it's amazing. So, but yeah, you do need to have you have to be slightly masochistic, I guess, to be able to do this.
And it's actually quite unglamorous, quite a lot of it. Like, there's a sort of glamour of some of how people think about some of the DDAT roles, but a lot of like that kind of work you're describing, Liz, is like, it's pretty hard graft.
There's some slog that happens in that work. I mean, I suppose to anyone listening today or listening to the recording later, if they were thinking, "Oh, this is an interesting area that I think I have something to contribute," what skills should they be focusing on developing? I'm thinking like soft skills wise.
Interesting. I think it's quite hard to articulate without them all sounding quite fluffy, but I think there's like sort of humility and curiousness feel quite important to me in terms of, like you were saying, Alex, not kind of going in and going and being a bit arrogant about like, this is our way of working and this is great, like, and let me teach you about agile waterfall program manager who's worked in a trust for 20 years, because that is just obviously, that conversation is just not going to get either of you the outcome that you want from it. So I think the humility and curiousness about our processes and the willingness and in fact the like desire to adapt them, so not to like stick rigidly to the way that we think we ought to do things, but to be curious about what works best in the context that we're operating in. And I think developing a really deep knowledge of that context, which is something that Liz is amazing at. Like Liz knows more about breast screening than people who've worked on it for quite a long time. I think that curiousness is part of how we build trust as well, because it shows to our users that we're not just coming in and like transplanting a framework on them that they don't relate to without us seeming to really understand how they work. But so I think, yeah, humility and curiousness feel important to me.
Nice. Like that. Did you want to make a point, Liz? So you come off mute again.
Yeah, and it's really hard no matter what situation it is. But I remember when I was in GDS, it was just like there was always a bit of training where you could have like having difficult conversations, and like you're gonna have to have so many difficult conversations. So and it is a muscle you have to constantly exercise, and when you don't do it, it feels very scary again. But that's one of them, and I think as well, just it's that kind of pattern recognition of this has been said 3 times now to me by 3 separate people in 3 separate professions. That is an important thing that you can then like jump on and start to be like, let's see if this is as important as I think it is. So kind of that, no matter how you do it, even if you reflect at the end of the day and like kind of write notes and like do that, but it's just developing pattern recognition of the things that you know will be a problem and that you can start to tackle early. Because otherwise it's just so disheartening if you're like, oh, I remember that person saying that 3 months ago, and now we're delayed by whatever months because we didn't go to that meeting and present whatever and things like that. So yeah, I think those would be my 2.
It sounds a little bit like trusting your gut is an okay thing as long as you're like qualifying it as a thing early. Yeah, not just making it up.
Yeah, and that's that is our advantage over AI. I've often said that actually, like that's what we bring humans to this work to do, is that we will have gut instincts that are based on experience and based on insight and based on data, and that's what we like. It's kind of uniquely ours, and I think we should be proud of that. I couldn't agree more with those sort of attributes that Liz and Sarah are talking about. I'm going to add another one in, which I think relates to the point about language, Sarah. I think that being able to speak multiple languages, being able to translate across teams and functions is like absolutely crucial to being able to, yeah, make and find and navigate this space around the thing, because we can probably all need to do some work in breaking down those language barriers, but they're always going to exist to an extent. And the skills in being able to translate and speak multiple languages are where we can get stuff done.
I
Absolutely.
like that's a good way of thinking about ourselves as like language learners.
Yeah.
I think there are also some basics, like when you join an organization, especially in government, you should have the basics of GDPR in your head, because they will inevitably apply when you're building a software product in government. And also things like just understanding the commercial frameworks. Like, you don't need to be a commercial expert, but know that, well, we mostly use DOS, or as I found out, there's a new one in healthcare, digital capabilities for health too, and things like that. So that, like, is again part of speaking that language, is just like knowing the kind of boundaries of what is usually the kind of happy path that you can then not have to worry about knowing that really. But if you don't know it, then all of that stuff comes as a surprise all the time.
Yeah. I'm going to pause us there and leave a bit of time for questions from people. I've just been scrolling through the chat. I think there's just been a lot of good chat happening mostly, but there is a question from Francesca about what the perfect team would look like.
Depends on what you're building. That's the answer.
I think that's right, though. I think it's so context specific. Like, I don't think you can do like building. I don't think you can build new services in healthcare without having clinical people in the team. But obviously, I wouldn't recommend that to every part of government. I think it has to be. I think it has to be really specific to the context. I think it's more about like opening up the idea that you don't need the traditional DDAT framework in every context.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's entirely kind of context specific. You do, I think, having that someone or some people or some roles with proper skin in the game, um, whatever the context is, I think is a kind of strong takeaway from this conversation, isn't it?
I think it's less about the teams, although, you know, if you're building a product that involves lots of data, you want a data person and things like that. But I think it's also the kind of attitudes of the people. It's like, you want problem solvers, you want people who can look with more than one hat on, and who can talk to their kind of data engineer as a user researcher and things like that. So it's like, it's truly collaborative working, and not just say, I will do the user research, you will do the service design. And it's just like having that space and time and general will to like compromise, because it's building things is always a compromise. So having the perfect team without those would also just not make a perfect team. It would make a terrible team.
Brilliant. I'm gonna leave a bit of silence, I guess, to see if anyone in the audience has a question they want to bring to the group. You can either come off mute and ask it yourself, or put it in the chat for us and I'll read it out for you. Okay, we've got one from Jane. So she has said, the panel have talked about the fact that a large volume of the outputs in this work are intangible and can make impact in subtle, unseen ways. It's about relationship building, sensing the environment, and influencing decisions based on the bigger picture and solving whole problems. So I'm interested to hear how you think we can celebrate this work more and make it more visible to generate a better understanding of the need for it.
So good. I feel like there is something about the language and how we describe the work, and we just don't have the like job titles like relationship manager just sounds so kind of drab in comparison with some of the like whizzy DDAT people. So I do think there is like a new type of language we need that gives prestige and specificity to some of that work. I would also say on the flip side that my experience has been that in lots of teams, the people who have the most kind of kudos and sway are those who really have the relationships and really have the context. So I think sometimes, while it might feel unglamorous as you're doing it, there is, like, you can often be quite powerful in the team if you've actually got the context and the relationships that the team recognizes that they need to get something done.
I think it's also, I like week notes and all that sort of stuff because, again, people see you doing the work and then will come to you for help with the work. And I think, again, in a nice collaborative environment, like our team is amazing, our whole team across all the products, our teams are great. And so they will shout out people, and like just doing that is really nice. Like you don't need a big thing every time, but also putting in the week notes and shouting that things there. I think the other thing is also making your work visible. So when we embark on the great trust engagement of 2026, creating kind of data to show progress and kind of shouting out like this has taken a year to get done, depending on trust, or like 3 months or whatever. It's like that has been meetings and effort and work and documents and things like that. So I think also thinking about how you can represent your work in a way that people understand or can visibly see, rather than like, yes, I've had 40 meetings this week or whatever.
Yeah. So I know we've only got a few minutes to go, but 2 questions have popped up in the chat. So we got another one from Francesca. The way forward is co-design and all the people involved in whatever we need to build, isn't it? Am I being a tad too generic? I guess it's also a culture change, making sure that decision makers are on board with the approach rather than a tick box exercise. So I suppose that's a question of like how applicable is co-design in this space?
I don't mind starting with that one. Like yes to co-design, but perhaps controversially also recognizing that design is always a choice and there is no perfect design. There may be better ones than others. So yeah, we absolutely need to co-design. We absolutely need to design with users and make sure that the thing works, but avoid a sense of paralysis that sometimes is a risk with seeking to find the perfect design that's going to work for everybody. So I think it might be slightly controversial.
I think we've said a few times throughout this chat, it's all about balance, isn't it? And the risk, like weighing up the different risks. I'm going to ask the last question. I know we've only got a couple of minutes, but I do want to make sure I ask this. So it's from Charlotte. What's your favorite example of something unexpected emerging in a project because people made space for things around the thing? Really putting you on the spot there.
Everyone's got real thinking faces on now, haven't they? I guess I'll call out Liz's work on breast screening, which we've spoken about quite a lot, but because I think the work that she and her team have done to understand breast screening officers and their processes really well has led to us understanding a process called round length planning, which for those who don't know and love, breast screening is about like how you match capacity, particularly if you've got a mobile van driving around, how do you know when to invite people in different geographies? And I think the work the team have done to spend time speaking to breast screening officers and understanding what that process is for really deeply has actually led to the policy team concerned understanding their own process better and thinking about how it might look in the future in a way that actually meets their needs better. And I think that's a really good example of something kind of emerging from some of that more hidden work.
Yeah, perhaps opening up the conversation more for transformation rather than lifting and shifting the as is. Yeah, for sure.
Because I heard lots of people in the past talking about, oh, and we're going to need to rebuild the round length planning tool. And actually, I think what Liz and others have uncovered is that that might not be the right answer.
I think that is a really nice moment to end us on, exactly at 1 o'clock on the dot. So thank you so much to Sarah, Liz, Alex for joining me today. I hope everyone in the audience has really learned something as well. Yeah, do message people on LinkedIn, etc. if you have some thoughts. Just volunteering you there. Excellent. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.